This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, developing world markets were up today as investors await a stance from the US Fed, of course, as it gears up for its two-day policy meeting today. MSCI's index for emerging market equities gained about 0.8% on the day, rising for the second straight day, with, of course, most gains made in Asian markets. In South Africa, the oil share was down today. Gold miners recorded some losses as we saw prices of the precious metal retreating from record highs today. As a result, miners like Goldfields, Anglo Gold, Ashanti and Sibanye Stillwater fell between 3% and 5% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show, Egypt and Sudan criticize Ethiopia for unilaterally filling the Blue Nile Dam. Zimbabwe gazettes laws requiring businesses to use the official exchange rate to price goods and services. And we look at the Nigerian chocolatier that's taking on the world with locally made treats. Well, we start off tonight's bulletin on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Egypt and Sudan have both criticized Ethiopia for unilaterally filling the Blue Nile Dam. And of course, this came during the latest round of talks aimed at regulating the flow of water from the project. Egypt and Sudan have expressed concerns over potential water shortages in their own countries. Negotiations have failed to yield an agreement to regulate the means of filling the reservoir and the operation of the dam. The $4 billion hydroelectric dam is being built about 15 kilometers from the border with Sudan. Egypt and Sudan rely heavily on the waters of the River Nile for a lot of their economic activity. Now, of course, the three countries held another African Union-mediated virtual meeting on Monday. Let's get the latest on those talks from Adel El Mahoui. He joins us now in Cairo, and of course, Coletta Wanjohi in Addis Ababa. Great to have you both on the show. Now, Adel, I'll start with you. The recent debacle around what Egypt and Sudan called Ethiopia's unilateral filling of the dam has, of course, raised many questions about the tone of the current course of negotiations. What have you observed, Adel, so far?
There is concern in Egypt, and the concern is growing. And that's because to it, the River Nile is the main source of life. It represents about 95 to 97% of the water it drinks. And the recent developments, seeing how Ethiopia is sticking to its own vision with a little regard to the other two countries' interests, or at least concern. And overall, this is the attitude that is raising a lot of flags to Egypt and Sudan as well, which Sudan, by the way, has reported some sort of a drop in the water levels coinciding with the filling of the reservoir, whether deliberately or not, as Ethiopia stressed. But the concern is that if there is heavy rain this year and the flood season or the rain season is quite lucrative with water, what would happen if it's the other way or the other way around in the next years? This is the main concern that both countries want to put sort of a framework to regulate until that before that time comes, and they find themselves quite harmed in terms of water levels reaching both countries.
Well, Coletta, Ethiopia has remained mostly silent on these issues, on those accusations of unilaterally filling that dam. What has been their feedback so far, their response to Monday's talks?
Well, Uche, one would call Ethiopia a very happy party as the negotiations go on, because where it stands now, it has already achieved its first phase of filling, which is approximately 4.9 billion cubic meters of water. But it has blamed this on nature. It says that nature filled the dam. It's not the one that filled the dam to that level. And it has said that from around July, where it has its heavy rainy season, that was why we got a lot of rainy water going into the reservoirs. So it is saying it was not a unilateral filling, it was not intentional filling, but it was kind of a natural pooling, and it's nature that did it. That's what that's the rhetoric that Ethiopia is going by. But also, as it does so, it says that it wants Egypt and Sudan to understand that it needs to use the Nile to have equitable distribution of water from the river Nile. So as we move forward, that is why we are not seeing Ethiopia arguing against anything, but saying that it has a right to use the Nile, and nature just helped it to fill the dam.
Well, Adele, given Ethiopia's explanation that we heard there, and of course a sort of perceived indifference with Egypt and Sudan's concerns, there certainly seems to be some pressure on the government now to adopt a more confrontational attitude with Ethiopia. Now, based on what you're hearing, what options is Egypt's government considering as of now?
There is definitely some sort of pressure from the media, from politicians, requesting firmer approach from the Egyptian government toward that file. However, today President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi was speaking in one of the public events of some projects he was opening today, and he has clearly dismissed any firm or any use of force towards that file specifically. President el-Sisi says that Ethiopia as people and nation are brotherly nation to Egypt, and he stressed that Egypt is not at all against any developmental projects in it. He also stressed that any sort of confrontation, of using force to resolve that issue will only complicate it more. And he stressed that the only way forward is negotiations, basically because this is where the source of Egypt's Nile come from, and there shouldn't be any hard, strong measures taken that would break the ties between those nations for a long time. And therefore, he says that as long as Egypt's water share is not affected, Egypt is not objecting to any project on the Nile by Ethiopia, whether it's the Grand Renaissance Dam or any future projects. The only red line that Egypt is concerned with is tampering with its water volume, which is already insufficient for its public.
Well, Coletta, we know what Egypt and Sudan want. They want a legally binding agreement that protects everyone. Now, as talks are set to resume next week, what are the most pressing issues at stake for Ethiopia at this stage of the talks?
Well, Uche, Ethiopia will be expecting Sudan and Egypt to understand that the 1929 and consequently the 1959 agreements by the British with these two countries, those agreements do not suffice. Ethiopia is saying that what should go on is the cooperative framework agreement that was signed much later after the formation of the Nile Basin Initiative that included more countries, about 11 riparian countries that share onto the Nile. It wants the negotiations going forward to base itself on this current agreement, which says that all the countries on the Nile have a right to use the Nile. So Ethiopia will be expecting Sudan and Egypt to understand that it is a different time, and it is a time when everybody needs power. Ethiopia needs power for its over 100 million people, for its development strategy, and to ensure that it comes out of poverty at a certain level. And also Ethiopia will probably be expecting Sudan and Egypt to understand that there is no need for another binding agreement. We know the African Union communique after the last meeting talked about the three countries should agree on a binding agreement on the filling and operation of the dam, but Ethiopia says there's no need for an agreement, just based on what has been there from 1999 and based on that. So it will be expecting technical agreements and also issues about the amount of time that it will be able to fill. Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? That's the kind of technical agreement it will be expecting from Egypt and Sudan.
Well, we'll certainly continue to watch that closely. Many thanks to both of you for that update. Adele El Marhoui joining us there in Cairo and Coletta Wanjohi in Addis Ababa. Well, let's move on now. A much-awaited report by an independent review panel has completely exonerated the president of the African Development Bank, Akiwumi Adesina, of any ethical wrongdoings. The distinguished three-member review panel was set up by the Bureau of Governors of the bank. It followed a complaint by the United States to review the process by which two previous organs of the bank, that's the Ethics Committee of the Board and the Bureau of the Board of Governors, had previously exonerated Adesina. Back in January 2020, 16 allegations of ethical misconduct were leveled against Adesina by a group of whistleblowers. The panel is led by former Irish President Mary Robinson. It also includes Gambia's Supreme Court Chief Justice Hassan Jallow and South Africa's former Director of Public Prosecutions Leonard F. McCarthy. And to Zimbabwe now, where authorities have gazetted new laws that require businesses to use the official exchange rate to price their goods and services. The move comes as the country seeks to rein in rising inflation. The directive compels businesses in the country to display, to quote, or offer the price for such goods or services in both Zimbabwe dollars and foreign currency at the ruling exchange rate. Here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with the details.
To hedge themselves against a depreciating currency, some businesses in Zimbabwe had begun pegging their prices to the parallel market exchange rate, which fueled inflation. It's a practice monetary authorities insist should not continue since the introduction of a foreign currency auction system in June that's meant to improve the availability of hard currency and stabilize the exchange rate.
I think all of us, consumers and everybody living in Zimbabwe, wanted to see some action from the policymakers that will bring rational balance to what is happening in the market over a long period of time. We cannot carry on this way. We're killing ourselves, and there has to be a stop somewhere. And this is the point where we do stop.
Fines will be levied on businesses that don't comply, which some may fail to do immediately.
Quite a number of manufacturers have not accessed the foreign currency on the auction system, and of course those few that have accessed the foreign currency are good to go, and they've also even adjusted their pricing accordingly. But the challenge is on those that may fail to meet the 50,000 minimum bid that has been set out by the Reserve Bank, and not everyone can be able to pull through resources in terms of liquidity.
The first 6 auctions have seen the Zimbabwe dollar depreciate 304% against the greenback, narrowing the gap between the official and parallel market rate. But not all bids have been allotted.
In terms of transparency, I think it's an improvement from the fixed exchange rate that was there. But I think ultimately it's failing to satisfy the demand for foreign exchange in the economy.
Its proponents argue that it's still early days. Some observers believe that the market, in particular sellers, are still adopting a wait-and-see approach, and that once a favorable rate has been settled on, they will start to offload their foreign currency, ensuring that there's more of it available for those that need it, which should lead to a reduction in prices and the burden on hard-pressed consumers. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. French oil major Total says that it's made a gas discovery at the Bashrouch well off the coast of Egypt. This is in partnership with oil companies Eni and BP. Now, Eni and BP both have 37.5% stakes in the North El Hamad license, while Total has a 25% stake. And Nigeria's Dangote Cement is considering an open tender for share buyback to return cash to shareholders and is deciding on the size of the program. The company's chief executive, Michel Pucheros, says the cement company could also conduct a market price buyback as part of its options. The funding for the buyback remains unclear, but the program is dependent on liquidity. And Kenya's biggest telecoms operator, Safaricom, in partnership with Google, has launched a program that allows customers to pay for 4G-enabled phones in installments. This comes as the company looks to increase smartphone usage in its network. Customers will be able to pay as little as 20 US cents daily over a 9-month period, with the ultimate aim of switching about 4 million 2G and 3G phones to 4G. And finally, Nissan Motors has predicted its biggest ever annual operating loss, estimated at $4.5 billion. It adds that it expects vehicle sales to tumble about 16% as the coronavirus pandemic hampers the company's efforts to turn around its business. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. We are taking a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. UK-based MedAccess announces support worth up to $50 million for COVID-19 medical products. And car importers in Uganda worry that the impact of the coronavirus will push them out of business.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nile.
Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, UK-based social finance company MedAccess has announced support worth up to $50 million for UNICEF in order to help it secure vital COVID-19 medical products. This includes diagnostic tests and clinical management supplies for low and middle income nations, while health officials in Africa have struggled to secure essential products from suppliers in their fight against the virus. Well, let's find out more about the project from CEO of MedAccess, Michael Anderson. He joins us now via Skype. Great to have you with us, Mr. Anderson. Now, as we just mentioned, African nations obviously have struggled to mobilize systems and, of course, supply chains in order to fill those gaps in their healthcare systems since the COVID-19 outbreak. Explain to us how this $50 million guarantee will help UNICEF, of course, faster respond to the continent's need for essential supplies.
Well, I think the key thing to remember is it's not just Africa that's struggling to get supplies, and the problem is particularly acute in Africa, but there's a global problem. Globally, we're seeing an unprecedented demand for medical supplies. We're seeing demand outstripping supply for many products in many parts of the world. And even countries who believe they are well prepared to face shortages are now facing trouble. So UNICEF plays a vital role in securing supplies because it is a centralized procurer. It can pool procurement. And what we are doing is we're providing financial backing for UNICEF so that they know the money will be there while they're assembling funding from various sources, including governments. And that's going to allow UNICEF to combine many, many small orders over time and combine them together to place really large orders. And that helps secure guaranteed delivery from overstretched suppliers. And for suppliers who are facing too many purchasers, that simplifies the process. It also means that UNICEF is able to ensure that they're able to respond to requests from countries in need all over the world. And it means that the purchases will be less exposed to the surging prices and uncertain supply that has characterized the market for COVID-19 supplies. UNICEF isn't the only one doing this. There's a really important Africa medical supplies platform that was launched recently that's working on the continent very effectively, and UNICEF's working with them. UNICEF is able to work with platforms like that to ensure that demand is aggregated, enabling access to lower priced quality products across the continent. So our financing is enabling UNICEF to play that catalytic role.
Well, give us a sense of how much global competition there is now for healthcare supplies, especially since the pandemic hit. And what do you see in terms of the challenges that the continent faces in securing those supplies, even though we have this platform now?
Well, I think leaders around the world naturally want to look after their own citizens. So there has been intense competition and quite a lot of nationalism about securing supplies. Unfortunately, that's led to unprecedented surges in demand and to price spikes for a range of COVID-19 products. And we've also heard quite a few stories of hoarding, inappropriate hoarding where need is not present, of purchasing in advance, locking up parts of the market. We've heard of some examples of profiteering, of fraud, of inadequate control of quality. So there are a number of places where the market has really broken down. And again, it's not just Africa, but Africa does face particular challenges. So given that those shortages are felt globally, including in high-income countries, the willingness to pay of some buyers significantly outstrips what lower-income governments can sometimes do. So where that ability to pay becomes a deciding factor, we want to help UNICEF replace it with a system where need is a deciding factor. And UNICEF works with 116 countries around the world. They've shipped more than 72.5 million items of COVID-19 related supplies. And they're able to operate at scale and with a global reach in terms of their offices, which really makes them uniquely placed to help out.
Well, this pandemic has certainly highlighted just how fragile Africa's healthcare systems and supply chains are. Now, give us a sense of what are your thoughts on what more can be done?
Well, looking to the future, I mean, this is clearly a clarion call for all of us to pay more attention to health. And I think we're seeing a lot of business leaders and politicians around the world recognizing that. One of the things we learned from Ebola was that those places where there were stronger health systems in place already had the resilience and the capacity to respond to the sudden surge in demand that Ebola brings about. The same kind of thing we're seeing with COVID. So the single most important lesson is that we all together need to invest in basic health systems and universal health coverage as far as possible. And that means investing in the personnel, the people, the infrastructure to put that in place. Another part is strengthening local production. I think we're seeing with COVID-19 some real opportunities for local production to be ramped up and therefore increasing total supply. There's some other important things to be done as well. And I would point to two. One of them is regulatory harmonization. At the moment, new drugs and new products coming into countries across Africa often have to seek registration, separate registration in every single country. So there's a real opportunity there for some harmonization. The proposed Africa Medicine Authority, for example, it could find ways to provide harmonized approvals for many countries simultaneously, and that would reduce the transaction costs and speed up delivery. So that's really promising. And the last thing I would point to is I think there's some really exciting new models at the continental level, including the work by Africa CDC is leading on a vaccine strategy for COVID, creating a framework for up to 12 clinical trials to take place on the continent, working with licensing models, thinking about appropriate supply chains for Africa. So there's a lot to be done. We personally, we think that there's a big role for innovative finance for the kind that MedAccess supplies, because the kinds of guarantees that we supply can help reduce risk across the system, build confidence among suppliers and confidence among those who are making the purchases that the supplies will be there. So we think there's a lot more to do in that space as well.
All right. Well, we do have to leave it there, Mr. Anderson, but thank you so much for joining us and your interesting insights there. That is the CEO of MedAccess, Michael Anderson, joining us there via Skype. Well, let's stay with the coronavirus. The world's biggest experimental COVID-19 vaccine study has finally kicked off. Over 30,000 planned volunteers have aided in testing shots, which were created by the U.S. government. However, there is still no guarantee the vaccine developed by the National Institutes of Health and Moderna will really protect. Volunteers won't know if they're getting the real shot or a dummy version. After 2 doses, scientists will closely track which group experiences more infections as they go about their daily routines, especially in areas where the virus is still spreading unchecked.
Once we introduce this into a large group of people, we can truly see the efficacy of the vaccine as well as the safety of the vaccine. And once we get past this trial, we can move into the general public and actually mass producing and having this given to the population. These vaccines have been fast-tracked, so it is a shorter time frame than would be for a regular vaccine, but we still need to make sure that the vaccine is going to be safe and effective.
We all feel so helpless right now. There's very little that we can do to combat this virus, and being able to participate in this trial has given me a sense of that I'm doing something, and it has helped me feel better about what's going on and what I'm contributing.
And let's move on now. Car importers in Uganda are worried about the effects of COVID-19 and how it could edge them out of business. They say since the country sealed off its borders and introduced stricter measures in March this year, they've seen a slump in business. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga with more.
Simon Mugayo is a second-hand car importer in Uganda. He runs a car market in Naguru, a suburb in the capital Kampala. But he's concerned about the decline in his business.
On average, we are expecting an inflow of about 150 units to the car bond. But during COVID, it came down to around between 30 and 50. So that's almost cutting it down to about 30%.
Mugayo says it is costing him a lot just to keep his business afloat. So he's now diversifying to offer more services at the car market.
We have introduced a car service as another way of trying to boost our income and maybe to diversify in case there's COVID. And along with that, we had also planned a restaurant, which we have now opened.
Figures from Uganda's tax body show that only 700 cars were imported in the month of April against a monthly average import of 3,000 cars before COVID-19. Most of these cars were imported before the outbreak of COVID-19. Car importers say they are struggling to offload their stock because there aren't enough buyers. Car dealers now want the local authorities to reduce import duties because of the impact of COVID-19.
Our businesses have been crippled by the pandemic. We want the government to reduce taxes so that we can resume business.
But the country's taxman says they've already responded to their plight.
All taxpayers who had outstanding penalties and fines as at 30th June 2020 were forgiven. So in other words, and I can tell you that the penalty and the fine is a huge liability on the taxpayers.
Uganda imports most of its second-hand cars from Asia. And as major exporting countries begin to ease restrictions, importers like Mugayo hope business will return to normal. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown regulations imposed since March have devastated the South African tourist accommodation sector. Income has decreased by about 98% in May 2020, and that's compared to May 2019. Here's Angelo Coppola with more on the industry's recovery plans.
The situation is disastrous for the South African tourism sector. Seasonally adjusted income from accommodation decreased by 96.8% in April and by another 20.7% in May. And the relaxation of regulations to allow domestic business travel hasn't had any meaningful impact either.
Hotels are operating at less than 4%. So it means that there isn't anything that's flowing into hotels. In fact, many hotels are still not open because it's just not worth it to operate a large property, for 4% occupancy. It makes no sense. So as much as, we do appreciate the business travel being open, it will be better complemented by the opening of leisure travel and also allowing people to cross provincial borders.
The restaurant sector is also in turmoil. The issue is the alcohol sales ban and the nighttime curfew, and the lack of clear communication between government and the industry.
There's a complete inability to work with us to look at solutions. If you can't lift the liquor ban, then help us financially. If you don't have funding and there's no resources, look at the components that you can give us relief on. What is the deciding factor in a restaurant to keep it open or closed? It is the lease. So help us with the leases. Allow our businesses to stay open and allow both the landlord to benefit and ourselves to keep doors open and keep people employed. So we put this in a memorandum where we wrote to the president.
The tourism and hospitality sectors are ready to welcome guests back. Safety protocols have been implemented that equal or surpass what other open economic sectors have introduced.
Demand is going to be a challenge, but it's better to look for customers than not to operate at all. We know how to do that, and we know how to do that safely. And another thing that's important, we have developed protocols that ensures that tourism is conducted in a safe way, just like many other sectors across South Africa and many other sectors in the world.
The restaurant sector has morphed itself several times during the lockdown.
First, we have been made into delivery services, then into takeaways. Then we had to become bottle stores. Then we had to become bottle stores with coffee shops. Then the minute we started getting people back into our restaurants, they cut the curfew. And at every single turn, there's a challenge every day that the restaurant sector's met with.
The devastation has been significant. In the tourism sector alone, it's estimated that some 300,000 jobs have already been lost. In the restaurant industry, the number of shuttered up shops is silent testimony to the damage that's been caused. Business owners simply want to start operating with all the right protocols in place. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Parkhurst, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business Africa. We're taking a short break now, still coming up. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank kicks off its annual meeting. And the world's largest nuclear fusion reactor gets into assembly in the south of France.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And just about half past the hour, let's recap the headlines. The World Health Organization has warned against complacency in measures to contain COVID-19 in the Northern Hemisphere during the summer. A spokesperson from the WHO said the coronavirus does not behave like influenza, which of course tends to follow seasonal trends. And the Chinese government is scheduled to begin construction of the new headquarters of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia this year. Our African Union and Chinese government representatives have signed an agreement outlining the project details. And the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, has proposed a 4-point plan to resolve Mali's political crisis. ECOWAS says the plan, which includes the formation of a unity government, should be implemented within 10 days. It has threatened sanctions against anyone standing in the way. And public health officials in Uganda say stopping the spread of hepatitis B through mother-to-child transmission, should be a top priority. Immunization against the disease is only done 6 weeks after birth, putting the baby at risk of being infected. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, Now, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has kicked off its two-day annual meeting. Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the opening ceremony of the event, calling for multilateralism and regional cooperation. Now, participants will also discuss the coronavirus pandemic and its effects on the global economy. Our reporter Wei Lin Tang has more.
The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is celebrating 5 years since its founding in 2016. And in its virtual annual meeting today, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for the multilateral bank to step up and be a new platform that promotes development for all of its now 103 member countries. One that progresses with the times and one that performs highly in terms of international cooperation.
全球抗击新冠肺炎疫情的实践表明
The global response to COVID-19 has made it clear that mankind rises and falls together. Mutual support and cooperation in solidarity are the only ways for mankind to overcome crises. To address issues emerging in the course of economic globalization, countries should pursue more inclusive global governance, more effective multilateral institutions, and more robust regional cooperation. In this context, the AIIB should grow into a new platform that promotes development for all its members and facilitates the building of a community with a shared future for mankind.
The AIIB has been actively providing COVID-19 related funding to help its members resolve economic and public health problems. It has established a crisis recovery facility to provide member states with financial support. $5.9 billion in financing has been approved so far to support 12 members, with a leeway of up to $13 billion for both public and private sector entities.
We actually intended to expand into health sector as a plan we had a couple of years ago. But the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed forward the schedule of our engagement with countries in health sector. Another area we would do is the digital development. As you see, the board has recently approved the digital strategy. We would like to close the gap of digital divide.
At the meeting, President and Chairman Jin Liqun was re-elected for another 5-year term, starting on January 16, 2021. One of the key takeaways from the online press conference that just happened is that the AIIB is eager to get back to normal business, to funding normal infrastructure projects as soon as possible. This comes as the bank seeks to not only help contain the virus, but also to help its member countries maintain economic growth. Wei Lin Tang, CGTN, Beijing.
Meanwhile, the AIIB has created a COVID-19 crisis recovery facility to support its members in their efforts to alleviate financial and public health pressures created by this pandemic. Now, the facility was established in April and will offer financial support until October 2021. About $5 to $10 billion will be given to public and private entities affected by the pandemic. The facility has also approved 16 projects, releasing almost $6 billion so far and benefiting about 12 members, including China, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and India. Well, let's shift focus now. The world's largest nuclear fusion reactor is being assembled in the south of France. The International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor is an international experiment designed to demonstrate that nuclear fusion can be a viable source of energy. Now, the experiment is headed by a joint consortium from China, India, the European Union, the United States, Russia, Japan, and South Korea. ITER, as it's called, will be the first fusion device to produce net energy, maintain fusion for long periods of time, and test the integrated technologies, materials, and physics regimes necessary for the commercial production of fusion-based electricity. Meanwhile, China has hit back at India after it banned dozens of Chinese apps, including TikTok. The Chinese embassy spokesperson says China will take necessary measures to make sure the legal rights of enterprises are safeguarded. China says India also has an obligation to safeguard the interests of international investors, including Chinese companies. Now, the Indian government crackdown is in response to a deadly border clash between the two nations last month. 59 apps were originally banned and another 47 have since been added to the list. Meanwhile, the French government will reconsider plans to build a fourth terminal at the Paris Charles de Gaulle airport because of the impact of the coronavirus crisis. Now, Transport Minister Jean-Baptiste Djebbari said the project, which is set to receive about 40 million more passengers by 2030, is probably no longer justifiable the way it was planned. Djebbari said French airports will still need investments for upgrade and will have to make sure that new types of planes, such as hydrogen-powered planes, can land. Well, Paris airports have been planning the construction of the fourth terminal, which will cost 8 billion euros for several years now. The airport is currently seeing about 40% of normal traffic, with levels higher for domestic trips than long-distance flights. Meanwhile, Belgium is bringing back some lockdown measures after a surge of COVID-19 infections at the port of Antwerp. That's as the number of coronavirus cases and deaths keep rising across Europe, as Ross Cullen now reports.
The news that European leaders have been fearing, bringing certain lockdown conditions back as cases rise. In Belgium, working from home again highly recommended, indoor and outdoor events limited, and shopping must now be done alone once more.
We are taking very strong decisions that are going to impact everyone hard, but in the coming weeks we'll probably see that the numbers will continue to deteriorate, and that will be really difficult for morale.
France also on alert as the summer holidays begin. Growing numbers of cases have led to doctors offering COVID-19 tests free of charge.
There is a large increase in the population here. A few patients got a text warning them they were in contact with someone in Paris who tested positive. There are people from the at-risk Mayenne region. We've had families coming from the UK. There are lots of people mixing, so these tests give us an idea of what's really going on in the field.
With travel restrictions lifted, millions of people are moving around Europe on vacation. Politicians are trying to balance the public's desire to enjoy a summer holiday with the problems caused by people being out in bars and restaurants and taking trains and planes.
Summer also marks the harvest season for farmers, and 500 employees are quarantined on one farm in Germany after more than 170 workers tested positive. The mass movement of seasonal labourers across the continent bringing an increased risk of infection. But as cases continue to rise across Europe, one Italian location has been spared. Isola del Giglio, off the coast of Tuscany, hasn't yet seen anyone contract the coronavirus. An island of hope amid the waves of new infections. Ross Cullen, CGTN.
Now, German airports have paved the way for testing stations to be set up in a bid to encourage visitors from countries deemed high risk to get tested for the coronavirus. The decision to test passengers at the airport was taken last week as new infections in Germany soared higher. Europe's tourism revival is running into turbulence only weeks after countries reopened their borders. This is because of the rising infections causing increased concern amongst health authorities over people bringing the coronavirus home from their summer vacations. Now, European countries kicked off the reopenings in mid-June, but recent events have shown that the new freedom to travel is subject to setbacks. And many British tourists had to cut short their trips in Spain because of a new order taken by the UK that any traveller arriving from Spain will have to undergo a 14-day quarantine. Now, the new order was to the dismay of British travellers and businesses in Spain.
The end of July is traditionally the big getaway here in Spain. The summer heat sends the locals flocking to the islands like the Balearics and the Canaries. However, this year, many British people are also leaving, following the decision by the UK government to reimpose a 14-day quarantine for all travellers arriving from Spain. It comes after regional outbreaks in Catalonia, Aragon and Navarra.
We will think very hard about going anywhere, because the thought of going somewhere and having the government suddenly say everything's gone wrong, it looks like we're going to get home. If our flights had been cancelled, it would have been disastrous.
Because England has more cases than Spain has, and it is ridiculous. I mean, no one's been given any notice, so we've had no choice.
Well, as you can see, there is a massive exodus of people currently leaving Madrid. Now, many of these people are genuinely going on their holidays, but many are British tourists who are cutting short their trips because of the UK quarantine order. And the money that those British tourists would have normally spent in Spain is going to leave a huge hole in this country's economy. That hole is worth just over $21 billion a year, with British visitors accounting for 19.5% of all spending by tourists in Spain in 2019. There is currently anger and confusion, especially in cities like Madrid, with businesses that traditionally rely on tourism feel that they're being unfairly penalised, with the new outbreaks occurring in areas far away from the Spanish capital.
Of course we are worried, because the subsidy the government has given us is not the same as before. All the businesses are closing, so we now work less hours than before.
The decision by the UK government is a massive blow to the tourism sector here. However, industry experts say while tourism is suffering in Spain, it will bounce back.
It won't lay down and die. Like I say, it's too important a part of our lifestyle now. We have created, over the years, tourism has been the industry that has grown year after year for the last 60 years. So businesses will struggle. The concept of travel and tourism will survive.
Even if the long-term prospects for tourism are good, that's little comfort to the thousands of businesses that need that income right now. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Now, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, face masks have slowly become the norm. Many countries have made masks mandatory now in public or closed spaces. While some object to the practice, others are seizing the opportunity to turn the humble face covering into the latest fashion accessory. Well, our correspondent Tony Chang has more from Bangkok.
Catwalk models in Berlin previewing the latest collection from Anya Gokul, and the hot new accessory is the face mask. Made from the same colourful fabrics as the collection, these are designed to complement the outfits and the wearer. But in Asia, fashion designers have been working with face masks for some time. Thai fashion label Greyhound turned their creative attentions to face masks at the beginning of the year. Heavy pollution in Bangkok had made mask wearing a common practice, and when COVID-19 hit, they had a line of masks ready to go. Creative director Bodin Apiman shows me some of the most successful ones. Masks with dog tags, catchy captions, one even sewn into the neck of a t-shirt. Hard to leave that at home when you go out. It is, he says, an opportunity to show your individuality when your face is hidden.
I heard that Westerners usually don't like to wear masks because it looks like you're sick. Only sick people wear them. But in this situation, the mask becomes an everyday accessory. And with these designs, it changes the perspective of those wearing it.
But there's been considerable resistance to the wearing of masks in the UK, the US, and elsewhere. The issue has even become a signal of political affiliation rather than general public health benefit. That debate never happened in Asia. Cindy Bishop is a former Miss Thailand, host of Asia's Next Top Model, and women's rights advocate. She believes the mask should be celebrated, not hated.
I think in Asia, it's almost like there's no other choice. It's not a question of whether or not to wear a mask. It's what kind of mask will match my outfit today. For us, it's common sense, I think. And in terms of masking the individuality, well, then it just becomes an extension of what I'm wearing today.
But whether it's fashionable or merely functional, a face mask is now universal on the streets of Bangkok, and most people wouldn't be seen dead without one.
With new collections to produce, fashion designers are always looking for something new. But as they prepare their collections for the spring of 2021, the face mask is still the #1 accessory. Tony Cheng, CGTN, Bangkok.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at how commodity markets performed today. Gold prices saw some major profit taking. and that's after hitting a record high on the day. The precious metal had risen almost $40 higher at one point to reach $1,980 per ounce. Now, a wave of selling pushed it back to about $1,915 per ounces. Meanwhile, oil prices pretty steady today, raising gains earlier in the session as, of course, rising coronavirus cases dampened the outlook for demand and, of course, countered optimism over more U.S. stimulus coming out. Well, let's take a short break now. Still coming up. We look at the Nigerian chocolatier that's taking on the world with locally made treats.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's go to Tanzania now. The country's fashion community gathered for the 6th annual Stara Fashion Week in Dar es Salaam at the weekend. But this year, the focus wasn't just on the clothes, but also the environment. Designers were challenged to create entire outfits with zero waste to help highlight the growing issues surrounding sustainability in the industry. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
Victoria Makamba is one of Tanzania's top models turned fashion designers. She is preparing a collection for the country's most innovative fashion event, the Stara Fashion Week. This year, her garments have to be made using 100% of all the materials that she has bought. Something Victoria says is challenging, but will pay off in the long run.
But it will also help us make more money, you know, because what we throw away, we didn't even know that we can use it in making things in our designs.
Organizers are hoping that through zero waste collections by designers like Victoria, they can influence change. From the point of designing to the stage, each of the outfits made tonight created no waste at all. The organizers hope that tonight's showcase can inspire designers and customers to create a more environmentally conscious fashion industry. According to the organizers, an average tailor throws out about 20 kilos of textile waste every month. Synthetic fibers, such as polyester, are plastic fibers, therefore non-biodegradable and can take up to 200 years to decompose. Synthetic fibers are used in 72% of our clothing. Asma Macau is the founder of the show. She says more needs to be done to make the industry more sustainable.
How are we encouraging them to come up with designs that will help create sustainability? We must show people that waste can be wealth.
The organizers say the fashion industry is the second largest polluter in the world, just after the oil industry, and the environmental damage is increasing as the industry grows. Baraka Jamal is a designer from Zanzibar. She says The show is a wake-up call for designers and customers.
We sometimes fail because of habits. So if we make it a priority to protect our environment, we will be able to succeed.
Organizers say even if fashion designers wanted to move further towards sustainable garment production, current consumption would make that almost impossible. The real problem is that far too many clothes are being produced, so they hope shows like this will set a trend that empowers and encourages more sustainable fashion in the future. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Now, Nigeria is amongst the world's largest producers of cocoa, but most of its cocoa is exported abroad. That means that cocoa products, such as chocolate, end up being imported into the country. Well, Losh's Chocolates, a startup in Lagos, is now working to change this by producing a variety of affordable luxury chocolates using homegrown cocoa. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has their story.
Losh's Chocolate, in the heart of Lagos. It offers customers handmade chocolate bars and chips. Using single-origin cocoa from southwest Nigeria, the beans are sorted and ground over a period of 48 hours to get the micron size. Entrepreneur Femi Oyedipe hopes to explore the gap between Nigeria's cocoa output and locally produced chocolates.
The agenda is to promote as best as we can locally produced chocolate products to meet our local needs that can compete globally on the shelves alongside international brands.
Nigeria is the world's 5th largest cocoa producer. Dependent on weather conditions and available inputs, production is estimated at between 50 and 60,000 tons. But almost all of the country's cocoa is exported, and supermarket shelves stack foreign chocolate brands which are usually cheaper than local products.
Losh's Chocolate is that little drop of water trying to make a mighty ocean. We're doing our best, to create and add value in that sector in Nigeria. So it will take, a lot more people wanting to do this to have the sort of impact that we are wanting to have.
Depending on the size and flavor, Oyedipe's chocolates retail for between $3 to $12. She chooses to focus on pushing for quality bars without additives or preservatives.
What we did was to pitch our tent such a way that we create a balance between price point and quality to deliver, so for some people, when they taste the product, they see the value, they see the quality, and the price is at the right price. So that gives us a competitive edge.
Entrepreneurs like Oyedipe, who set up their businesses using personal savings, face a difficult task in competing with cheaper imported brands. Riddled with infrastructure and erratic power supply challenges, Oyedipe now processes 6 tons per year. But she hopes to expand production capacity to a 72-ton factory in the next 2 years. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Well, before we go, let's take a look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand firming up today. Traders say a lack of local drivers turned attention to a U.S. Fed meeting today. Of course, with no data scheduled to drive currency markets right now, the rand is expected to break through the 16.35 rand per dollar level. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling unchanged today. Traders say inflows from remittances help to meet that dollar demand coming in from the energy sector. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.